Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of our WCNFluencer podcast. I'm your host, Christopher McClellan, and I am delighted to introduce one of our new podcasters to the Whole Care Network, Jeanette Yates. Jeanette,
well, hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Goodness gracious, Saint Ignatius, and I'm excited to have you here too because you're bringing a very special message to the Whole Care Network about self-care for caregivers. But before we get into all that, let all of our listeners and our viewers know a little bit about you and your story and path to caregiving.
So I am 48 years old, and in 1984, when I was a mere 8 years old, my mother was diagnosed with an illness. And so in some capacity for the last 40 years, I have been a caregiver, or at least part of her caregiver team. And that has meant different things over the decades, obviously. But in the last 10 years, I have, taken more of that primary full-time role with her as, more conditions happen, things progress, all that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, I'm a wife, I'm a mom of two almost grown kids at this point. They're fly in the nest. But I am a former high school English teacher, fitness instructor, avid reader, drama queen, as my friends would say. I actually taught drama when I taught high school. So I have lots of different hats that I've worn throughout my whole life. And of course, now I wear multiple caregiver hats, parent hat, employee hat, colleague hat. And my favorite hat that I wear right now is that I'm a self-care coach for caregivers. And I really help them develop and create their own sustainable self-care practices because, if we're not getting some guidance and help, chances are we're going to put that on the back burner. And I don't know, Chris, have you ever put something on the back burner? Do you know what happens to the stuff you put on the back burner?
I have about 66 years of stuff on the back burner. It's like it's going to explode.
It's going to blow over. So. Sometimes it burns all the way into the thing, so back burner is not good. So that's why I do what I do now with the self-caregiver.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you, as I asked all my guests, and maybe I've asked you this before, but have you met anybody that has caregiving on their bucket list of things to do in life?
No, I haven't. Although I do know that everybody is going to have an encounter with caregiving at some point in their lives. It is a universal thing that happens. We either have been a caregiver, are a caregiver, will be a caregiver, or will be in need of caregiving. So in the course of our lifetime, it will cross our path at some point.
Right. And I think that's why it's so valuable for all of us who have had our turn to continue to share the stories and encourage folks like yourself who have your own personal story, yet are able to communicate it in ways that touches people, because it's through, and it's our mantra on the Whole Care Network, it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause.
Yes.
And when we share our stories, we not only is it cathartic for us, it helps those who are coming before us. So that's why it's so good. It's so good to connect with you. But I gotta backtrack because I learned a couple of things about you that I didn't know before. That you were an English teacher and you taught drama. I think that's pretty exciting.
Well, it's easy to teach drama when you're in a middle school or high school setting because there's lots of drama from which to pull. But I've always been yes, I've always been, being a literature enthusiast. I've always loved Shakespeare and all of those kind of things. And so when I had the opportunity to teach that in a high school setting, I jumped on it. And like you mentioned, storytelling in all its various forms, whether it's, just a novel or plays, right? Monologues, things like that. They really are a universal way to connect people with the human condition and the experiences that we all go through. And so I've brought some of that storytelling into even what I do now with Self-Caregiver and also the podcast. I make sure that we are telling stories, but also encouraging our caregivers.
Exactly. You anticipated where I was going, because you do bring that avenue into your new podcast on the Whole Care Network, From Guilt to Good: Self-Care Solutions for Caregivers. You share those stories, not only of yourself but the guests that come on, and I think that's it's so appropriate to connect to people through those story sharing. But why guilt to good? Because that word guilt means a lot of different things to people. But I think I get it in this sense. But let all of our viewers and listeners know how you look at From Guilt to Good.
So the reason the podcast is called From Guilt to Good is that I think that self-care should make us feel good, not guilty. And I have experienced in my own life, and I hear from caregivers every single day, that one of the things that keeps them from taking better care of themselves, it's not like they don't know that they need to do it, right? I mean, it's we all have that, like, yeah, I should probably, go to the doctor myself, or I should probably get more sleep or whatever, but we don't do it. And the number one reason why is they feel guilty about setting that boundary, taking time for themselves, spending money or time or any other resources on themselves when they could be either giving that care to the loved one that they're caregiving for, or like in my case, it's not just a choice between me and my loved one. I have multiple, I have two parents that need care. I have children, I have a home, I have a pet, I have a job, so there's all these other things pulling for my attention. So for a long time, it was very hard for me to not feel guilty about that,
Right.
that giving myself that care. Or a lot of people feel guilty because they feel like they should be better at self-care. I'm not strong enough, I'm not fit enough, I'm not thin enough, or whatever, and it's like, well, you know what, you're the best person. You're the only person that can take care of yourself. You're the only person that can do your own self-care. So I want to help people feel confident in that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like to say, if you could take care of yourself half as good as how you take care of the person that's entrusted in your care, then you're doing pretty good. But most of us, don't. That word that you said, which really illuminated with me, boundaries.
Yeah.
It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to learn to say no, but it's hard.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I was talking with one of the caregivers that is in my community, and she said, I don't want to be like the greatest self-care person ever. Like, I don't need to have a massage every day and, nails done and hair, she's like, I just want to take care of myself as well as I take care of a plant. And she gave the example of when she was watering her plant one evening and realized that her plant was more hydrated than she was that day, that she had not had any water all day long, but she was concerned about that plant. And she's like, yeah, I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to have all the time or all the things. I just want to treat myself as well as I treat my plants, which, that's a great starting point.
I love that analogy.
Yes.
Yeah. I've often said, especially in life after caregiving, which is really where I'm at these days, is that in order to bloom again, you need to find the water. You need to find that path, the nourishment, and the analogy that you used with plants is so appropriate, because oftentimes we forget to water the plants. And if we're not watering ourselves and giving that, even if it's just 5 minutes a day of me time, allowing yourself to do that, or 5 extra minutes in the shower, it does impact you.
Well, and one of the first things I like to teach anybody that I work with is go ahead and identify the ways you're already taking care of yourself. because we think we don't have any time for self-care. Well, chances
Oh,
are you're doing
very good.
something. You're bathing, you're brushing your
Mhm.
teeth, you are maybe, drinking a cup of water a day, or you're sitting down to do a journal or quiet time or something. Like, there is something that you're doing. Now, sometimes it is only like teeth brushing and showering. But if you say to
Mhm.
yourself, this is my time to take care of myself today, this teeth brushing, this is all I'm going to get, but I'm going to own this moment for myself. I'm going to acknowledge that
Right
I'm
on.
doing it to take care of myself. That starts to change that pattern in our brain that we don't take care of ourselves. And I think that is so important. And the first step in opening that door to understanding that you're probably doing better than you think. And
Right.
start where you are, and then you build on that, right? So that I always talk about that mindful moment. Enjoy that
That
toothbrush time. Get it.
perfect. Enjoy it and own it.
Yep.
And I think the other things that the other area that I pretty sure that you talk about regularly
Mhm.
is getting the caregiver to feel that they're worthy of the
Yes.
self-care, and that it's okay to take care of yourself. And not only is it okay, it's vitally important, because
Right.
you're the lead. And if you're not taking care of yourself, how can you take
Right.
care of others? So
Right.
it's very
So,
hard to make that make
yes.
that
And
connection.
so, of course, taking care of ourselves helps us be better carers, better community members, better humans, because, when we're well nourished, have proper sleep, move our bodies, all of these things, interact with others. I also think that, even if you're an introvert, being in community is important as an important part of self-care.
Right.
Engaging in whatever community you want to engage in and however you want to do that. I think that's all important. But I also want people to know that they're worthy. If you can hear my voice right now, you are worthy of care, not so that you can go care for someone else, but because you're a human, and that makes you worthy
Right.
of care. And that's what I had to strip, it's not, yes, the byproduct of taking care of myself is that I'm a better caregiver for everybody else. But even if I didn't have my kids, my mom, whatever, even if I didn't have other people depending on me, I still am a human. I'm still worthy and need, not only is it worth, but you can't live without sleep, nourishment, all of those things. And so that's one thing that I really think is important. And another thing that I hear all the time, and I want to make sure that people understand, is that care that we are giving other people, when we care for ourselves, we are demonstrating, we are being examples for the people watching us.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I want my children, who, like I said, are practically grown at this point, want them to see is, yes, I took good care of the people entrusted to me, but I also made sure that I was taking care of my physical health, emotional, mental, relational health with other people. I was paying attention to my marriage. I was paying attention to my parenting. I was doing all of those other things as well,
Mhm.
because when they have to wear that caregiver hat, I want them to have that model. So there I am.
Oh goodness. Where were you 11 years ago when I first started my caregiving experience? I
Well,
think
I was just
because
starting to get into the trenches. I can tell you that right now. So you're a little bit ahead of me on the journey.
yeah, well, because caregiving happens usually for two reasons, two things
Hmm.
that it's an unfortunate accident or an untimely diagnosis,
Hmm.
and suddenly you're thrust into this. And most
Hmm.
people really have not interacted before with the medical system or the legal
Right.
system, the social service system. But I will say I've been corrected over the last couple of years, where some people have approached me and said, well, I've selected to be a caregiver because
Hmm.
my spouse or my partner has had a handicap. And I just, like, oh my goodness, that is so
Yeah.
true. And my heart warms when I hear that. But
Yes.
for the
Yeah.
majority of us, we're thrust into this with very little knowledge or experience. And that's why it's so important for folks like yourself who are in the middle of it to be able to share your expertise and your experience, because people connect with that.
Well, and that's why hearing all different stories from all different types of caregivers is so important, because the someone who chooses it, or the someone who is caregiving for a child or a spouse, is the experience is different than caregiving for a parent.
Right.
And I'm going to circle back to that in a second, but I did think of one more thing I wanted to say about worthy. One of the things that
Sure.
hinders us about with our worthiness is we may say, like I mentioned before, like, oh yeah, I know I need care, but we compare our need for care with someone else's. So I do need to care,
Ah,
but my mom needs my attention. Her situation is
yeah.
worse than mine. She is more worthy of care right now than
Hmm.
I am. Right?
Oh,
That's essentially what we're saying. And really, her care is just as important as my care. It may look a lot different than mine, but I'm just as worthy of care as she is. And so that's one thing that I
I
think is really
love this.
important. And then
Yeah.
another part, and this is like really kind of like my passion, like I'll help any caregiver that, wants to get better at self-care. I'm here for you. But the caregivers I feel particularly drawn to help are people like me who have their own health situation that they're have worked through, or are working through. So in my case, I am in recovery and have been for a long time. I've been in strong recovery from eating and body image issues. But
Mhm.
when I, took my eye off the ball over the last, in recent years, I began to feel that pull in some of those things that we talk about in the recovery community, like those slippery slopes, like, ooh,
Right.
I need to be paying attention to my recovery right now to make sure that I stay um, away from relapse. And, and my recovery journey is different than everybody else's, but there are people out there who are in recovery from addiction or other issues, or maybe, situations with their family. And then they're thrust back into the very situations that kind of caused
Right.
some of that,
That
or
caused it. Right.
yeah, that, well, contributed to
Mm-hmm.
their, issues. And I want to let them know that I see them, and I think that their recovery is so important, and I want to help them make sure that they have the self-care tools that they need. So one of the
Right.
things in my program that I help caregivers do is build their self-care toolkit. And this is something I actually learned when I was in recovery. So when I was working with my counselors, we had like a recovery toolkit, and you might have different things in there. So you have as your support system, and maybe you went to a dietitian for a while. Maybe you had a food journal, let's say. Well, I don't, it's 15, 17 years down the road. I'm still not writing down everything I eat every day. That's not a tool that I use right now, but it's still in my toolbox in case I need it. So I have a toolbox that I can put stuff in, take stuff out, depending on what I need. More support, more, assistance from physicians, whatever. I have that at my medications, whatever. I have that at my disposal for when I need that. And I think caregivers can have that same self-care toolbox. And
Right.
of course, if you're a caregiver who's in recovery, your self-care toolbox probably has some elements of recovery toolbox in there too. So that's
Right.
kind of one of the things that I'm passionate about as well, as you can tell, because I'm just going on and on.
I think it comes out loud and clear. And one of the beautiful components of this, Jeanette, is your ability and willingness to share your journey and your experience, not only as a caregiver, but in recovery as well. And the people that you will touch through that openness and honesty, because I could just picture this where somebody's listening to your story and they say, that's me. I didn't know there was somebody else out there like me. I
Right.
thought I was all by myself doing this.
Right.
I mean, there's a group, there's somebody that I can go to that's going to totally understand me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, one of the essence of what you're creating is that, through your own personal journey of both recovery and caregiving, that you're going to touch so many people that are in that similar position. And you can, you not only can walk the talk, you can talk the walk. If that's, and that's so important in these journeys.
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there, and like I said, where everybody's going to encounter caregiving at some point, right? But I think there's so many of us that we find ourselves, nobody comes from a perfect family, certainly, but
Right.
even if you did come from a perfect family, your caregiving situation caregiving is difficult, period, end of story. It just is.
Exactly.
And so then when you add some of those components of, difficult family dynamics, or maybe, like I said, there's that maybe an addiction story or something in your past or present, I think we've got to pay attention, and we've got to we've got to start talking about it, because as you're aware, the number of family caregivers is growing and growing and growing. There's more and more
it's
need
only
of
going to
them.
continue to grow.
Right. And that means that more and more people who weren't necessarily planning on being a family caregiver find themselves either doing that or trying to decide how much of a capacity they have. And that's another thing I encourage caregivers to do, is to make sure they're really clear on their capacity for caregiving. And it's okay to set a boundary there as well. So,
and I had to learn this the hard way. Sometimes it's okay to say no.
Yeah.
When it's okay. Appropriate, but you have to learn what that is and what those boundaries are. And I didn't have that. I didn't have somebody like you starting out. I had great mentors, but you think about how caregiving, the conversation in and around caregiving has really expanded since, especially since COVID.
Yes.
There's great resources out there like yourself who are sharing their experiences that are making it easier for those who will come after us. So goodness. I'd also like to talk a little bit about your coaching program.
Okay. So it's hot off the presses, actually, Christopher.
That's right. That's right. Because I kind of had the inside information on that.
Yes. So. And so I'm creating a program that is going to be flexible. We're working on creating a community where you can have accountability for your self-care. So there are other communities out there that will support you and help you answer questions about caregiving. I want to help you answer the questions about yourself and what you need. And so when people, it's the Empowered Self-Caregiver cohort, it'll be launching here at the first of the year, or opening. It's not really going to be launched. It's just going to be that door's open. But we're going to be walking through some pieces that I've walked through too. Getting that clarity, because you were like, where were you? And I was like, well, I wasn't having boundaries. I didn't have them, that's where I was. But now I know I've got to get that clarity, be an advocate for yourself, create those boundaries, develop that resilience, and enjoy what you're doing with your self-care. And that's what the program is. And of course, there's a lot of elements so that you have the support you need. You can access information in a way that is convenient for you. Cause not a lot of programs out there for non-caregivers are like, meet for an hour a day or check in every day, or sit down for a long Zoom. And we don't have the time for that. Right.
We have the time for that.
Or predictable. I mean, or even if we think we do, we don't. right? Something happens.
Very much so.
So there's going to be some flexibility and ways that you can access not only the information, but the one-on-one coaching and things like that, plus group coaching and accountability. So there's going to be some options there. And I'm really excited about getting that off the ground here in the next few weeks. So that's what we're working towards. But it's really going to be about providing the resources for them to create their own self-care toolkit so they can use it. And it's flexible. One of the things that a lot of times, like just generic self-care programs out there or fitness programs or food lifestyles, right? They don't work because you have to be in a box. You have to be like at a certain place at a certain time and consistent. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't work for me. Like I can't always eat this stuff, but like, how do we incorporate self-care into our life? Because I don't think self-care is something to put on the plate. I think self-care is the plate.
Is the plate.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get a dining set saying self-care is the plate. That's the way
right.
to do it. Goodness. And Jeanette, I mean, you're just doing terrific work. And I know this isn't going to be our only conversation, but let all of our viewers and listeners know how they can learn more about you and your great work.
Well, I am on Instagram all the time at the Caregiver, and that's where I share about my podcast, which you can also find anywhere. That's called From Guilt to Good, Self-Care Solutions for Busy Caregivers. But the Caregiver on Instagram. I also have a website, theselfcaregiver.com. But come hang out with me, learn, grow with me. One of the things that I really like about the podcast, Christopher, is I am just bringing every self-care expert I've ever met that is beating the same drum, and I'm talking to them and letting them share and give advice and insights to caregivers. So if you need something that is flexible and works with you, that podcast is going to be where you need to go to. So that's my pitch.
Yeah, and you can also find all of Jeanette's information on the Whole Care Network on her landing page and podcast. Also featured now in the new WCN streaming radio channel, which go to the App Store and the Google Play and download the Whole Care Network streaming app and check out the great work that Jeanette Yates is doing.
Thank you.
In the idea of self-care. Jeanette, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast. Can't wait to do it again.